All right, welcome back to episode 6 of Writer's Block, hosted by yours truly, Sean Reider, Journal staff writer. Today we are joined by a very special guest, New Mexico head football coach Bronco Mendenhall. Bronco, thanks for coming on today.
Glad to be here.
Well, just want to dive right into it. I mean, you've been the head coach here for just over 6 months, I believe. You've already had some good accomplishments so far. I think a 3.22 highest ever program GPA was announced yesterday. But I mean, just kind of a broad question. I mean, how have the last 6 months or so been for you?
Yeah, that is a broad question. Transformational, I would say, but that's by intent. So transforming the program, that's our intent. Transforming young people, helping them become, right, more and better versions of themselves. Indicators happening along the way, at least some that are areas relatively related to football, but our program, again, is comprehensive. On the field certainly matters, and those results are essential. But really, every part of the program matters to me, and growth and progress and development has to happen in every part of the program, which is, I think, why the job is so fulfilling and exhausting and necessary all at the same time. So you mentioned the grade point average. Anytime there's a first ever, not first since. First sinces are very powerful, and they also are meaningful. And so it might be first since, and the longer the year span, the better. First evers are different. That means since the inception of an institution or the inception of keeping record or something like that, it's never happened before or never been as good as. And so the significance of a grade point average from December till now that's never happened before, I think is a good indicator of an approach not specific to academics, but relative to every part of the program. And so while certain areas will grow at different rates, numbers matter to me, facts matter, percentages matter, and outcomes matter. And so I love super high expectations. I call them extreme expectations. And I love fierce accountability, and that's part of our culture. The accountability part, the discipline part, the effort part, and really what I've learned over this will be my 18th year being a head coach is when accountability is married with discipline, and then kind of brought to life through effort in relation to extreme expectations, results usually follow. I'd love to guarantee the result. I'm stopping short of that. But the record says more often than not, there is strong results and pretty amazing young people. And as we continue to talk just the academic part, it's really not a surprise to myself and my staff. Usually academic success has come not only at BYU and usually better than what it was at the University of Virginia, which is an amazing institution, better than what it was. My job and why I was hired was to move every part of this program forward, make it better than what it was. And my job is conditional on that. And it plays out in front of everyone to see, which is just how the nature of college athletics and being a head football coach works.
You did just mention, the idea of fulfillment and exhaustion kind of taking over sometimes in that 6 month period. I mean, does it feel like it's been 6 months at all, or does it feel longer, or maybe even shorter in some ways?
It feels significantly longer most of the time, but then, when reflecting, really short. We've only been here since, but feels like, and that's kind of how a lot of our staff conversations start. We've only been here since, but feels like. But I think that happens when there's a lot to do. And I think most people are happiest, right, when they're stretched, both their mind and their body, in something they volunteer for that's difficult and worthwhile. And a lot of the reasons why I'm here is this job is difficult and worthwhile, and there's a lot of work that has to be done, and it's worth doing. And so I'm fulfilled by that.
Spring practice was kind of the first taste that we saw of a lot of that work and stuff like that, with a little more time to digest. I mean, the last time I talked to you, I believe, was literally right after spring practice concluded. I mean, what kind of were your final impressions and thoughts of what you guys got done in that spring period?
Yeah, really just a starting point. Installation, offensively and defensively, in terms of scheme, application of culture, personnel assessment. Man, lots of teaching and lots of expectation management, and really assessing and then re-architecting where the program is from where the reference points showed they are and showed where we are in relation to the tasks that we have ahead. And so every day was feedback, and with feedback we learn and then we apply, and then we compete and we execute, and then we do it again. And so the feedback loop is always going. And so spring gave us the beginning of the feedback loop, which then helped us frame and architect this next time period, which is June and July, which is the equivalent of a second off season, similar to January, February, March-ish prior to spring practice. So it's a second off season. It's smaller in terms of its window. Urgency is increased if that's possible, with the addition of basically a significant number of new players with less time to onboard them and get them ready for what the players that arrive in December have had a chance to do.
I spoke with offensive coordinator Jason Beck last week, and he mentioned that kind of the focus, at least for the offense, the way he's kind of approaching it in terms of this kind of summer period, is making the things that you guys are already good at, making them great in some ways. What is your overall approach to June and July, heading into fall camp and whatnot?
There's a lot. And so what Jason was talking about is just simply from the book Good to Great. Many of us, when we think about becoming great, we target what we're not good at, and then we work really hard to see if we can transform that into being great. That's actually a flawed model. The way to become good, from good to great, is take what you're already good at and then accelerate that, spend a disproportionate amount of time on that to make good to great. Now, that only works if, you don't have any fatal flaws. That means things that are so poor in your program or so poor in your coaching or so poor in your execution that it's below industry standard. That means that it gets in the way of even being good. So we have to assess and look at anything that's significantly below industry standard, make sure that's moved to at least where we can function and function as others do, and then all the rest of the attention is from, as Jason mentioned, good to great. So applying that now in the off season, continue to work on scheme improvement, continue to work on strength and conditioning, continue to work on dynamic movements, continue to work on culture development, a special focus on our first four opponents, onboarding what's been added as 60 new players since we've arrived, 17 new scholarship players since the end of spring practice, with a week 0 game, which is less time to do it in. So we have lots going on.
Kind of flipping things to the process of putting together a roster. I mean, first off, just kind of the lead, you guys had a not insignificant number of guys kind of leave, right after the season and throughout spring ball and all that. But to my knowledge, I don't think you had anybody leave directly after spring practice. Was any of that surprising to you? I know it was a transitional period, but in the modern atmosphere of college football, I mean, did that surprise you at all?
We were hopeful that would happen, and surprise would probably be too strong of word. We anticipated a possibility, but we really didn't think that it would happen. And so I'll frame that to our listeners. Really, for the group of 5 level football team, the time that causes probably most anxiety other than the season for head coaches is when spring practice is done. It's the second portal period. And most of the time, what used to be called Power 5 or Autonomous 4 now, whatever the word is using for teams that have a lot of money, whatever word that is, those teams usually assess their roster after spring. And most of the time, they're not looking for starters, but they're looking for critical backups. Where do they look? Including tampering. They look at the group of 5 schools, good players from group of 5 schools, that they then can buy, offering 2, 3, 4, or 5 times the amount if they are making any NIL money. And they do that after spring practice. The challenge then is for a group of 5 team, who do you replace someone with after spring practice, and what pool do you draw from prior to the season to do that effectively? And so to your point, 17 players in our program from after my arrival through spring practice had chosen to leave the program. However, when spring practice was over, from players that we were counting on, that we valued, that we needed, that we wanted, and that we had penciled in significant spots, not a single one left. There's an underlying endorsement there of direction. There's an underlying endorsement of confidence, of support, but also belief. that not only what we're doing will work, that they feel actually lucky and grateful to be part of it, and they're anxious to have the role that they had carved out to that point. That doesn't guarantee anything for anybody other than, I would say, a beautiful start. And anytime a coach at the group of 5 level can hold on to their roster through spring and through the period that we just did, you have to count that as a victory, and which we did.
I think one guy in particular that had, even before you came in, had certainly carved out a role in the program's future, Devin Dampier. I mean, and I think it wasn't even through the first week of spring practice. I mean, I think it literally was the second practice we asked you, and you said, yeah, right now, I mean, Devin's our quarterback at the moment. I mean, how big is it in some ways to, kind of have a young guy that you're coming in with this program and, you don't have to go through an elongated, quarterback battle or quarterback competition in some ways, even though competition is often a good thing.
Yeah, I think it can be a good thing. A quarterback, it's challenging to manage that, knowing that one of the keys to success and improvement is repetition, quality repetition, and deliberate practice. Anytime deliberate practice repetitions are split, usually improvement is slowed. We happen to have a quarterback returning in Devin Dampier, but at most points through our spring practice, he was our only quarterback with injuries, and that means he got every repetition. He was clearly our number one prior to injury. Wow, was I impressed with where he's starting from, what his capabilities are, and many coaches, it's a pretty consistent adage that you'll hear, when you have a quarterback, you have a chance. There's a disproportionate value to quarterback at Brigham Young University when we had Taysom Hill. You've got a great chance no matter who we played, including University of Texas, whoever you think is significant in college football. When you have a great quarterback, you have a chance. If he can run and throw, you have even a better chance. When he's an experienced and great decision maker and he can run and throw, you have even a better chance. And the team knows that. The same at the University of Virginia. In the jump we took from 2-10 to the Orange Bowl, Bryce Perkins. There's a lot of other factors that would say, yes, we improved our program at the University of Virginia and at BYU. If you really said what was the most significant factor, it's quarterback play. And I really like what I've seen from Devin so far. We've added 2 junior college players at quarterback. I really like both of them, and we get both Justin Holiday and Isaiah Chavez back healthy. Our quarterback position is deep, it's competitive, and we'll have to sort really through not who number one is necessarily, but our succession planning and what the roles for others might be. And so that's a different challenge than naming a starter.
Running back in particular, you guys, and we talked about it a lot throughout the spring, you guys added Eli Sanders from Iowa State, Javon Jacobs from Arizona State, and then most recently N'Keary Rodgers from Campbell. But you also pulled Andrew Henry out of the transfer portal as well, as along with I think Christian Ellis was another withdrawal, and I think Tavian Combs was another withdrawal. So 2 guys in the secondary there. I mean, and you talk about kind of the hold and stuff like that. How big it was to get some of those guys returned out of the portal as well?
Well, I think there's a word that we use or a phrase that we use in our program, and it's not original to us. It's real recognizes real. I don't share anything really with you or any of my players that's not real. And so I simply presented an opportunity with a realistic idea of what this is going to look like, what it's going to require, which I presented how difficult and challenging the program is, but the opportunities that lie ahead and what their role in the transformation could be. And they chose to either stay or come. And that's an amazing thing. In addition to the players you mentioned, Soljay Maiave is coming also from Brigham Young University. And so, yeah, there's the depth, the versatility, and while they're all listed possibly at running back, yeah, that won't describe what they do. And so they could be lined up at multiple positions, will be used in multiple ways, in different combinations, sometimes 2, 3, or 4 on the field at the same time doing different things. And Bill Belichick, right, had a really cool saying, the more you can do, the more you can do. And I've kind of added another part to that. The more you can do, the more you can do, and the more you can do, the more valuable you are. And so when we have players that can catch the ball, can run the ball, can return kicks, all of a sudden those guys become, and our program becomes more versatile and deeper. And so besides the quarterback position, anytime we're talking ball handlers, you're talking outcome. The team culture has to be great. The physicality has to be on point. The competitive spirit and the execution and the consistency, all those things. I'm not diminishing any of those. But when the players that touch the ball are capable, skilled, driven, and talented, that increases our chances.
To be clear, Soljay is playing running back. That's the plan now.
That's a great running back-ish. We'll just put ish on there, and he might just call it that position, and we'll just see. I'm not quite sure yet.
I think you guys at Virginia on the depth charts, you would sometimes just list football guy
football player.
Football player, yeah.
I would put him in that category. Keaton Thompson for UVA was that player, and so we like football players because they play football and they do about anything you want them to do. So he's in that category, but so some of those other guys are as well that you mentioned.
So we can expect a football player or two on the depth chart come August.
It's possible. We might rebrand it here at UNM, or you might just see football player. I don't know what we'll call it, but you'll know the intent.
I wanted to ask you about a couple more football players you guys did recently add. You announced 13 official transfers last week. I think 7 on the defensive side of the ball, if I'm correct.
I don't know. I'll trust you. I'll take your word for it.
I do believe, yes. My notes here are saying 8 transfers on the defensive side of the ball, 3 linebackers, 4 DBs, 3 that have spent time at corner, 1 that spent time at safety, and then at 1 defensive lineman. I know linebacker had been a kind of a position that you cited in the spring as a place where you guys, at the very least, just needed more numbers at. But what was, your kind of overall approach, at least maybe if you want to portion the defensive side of the ball out, in this spring portal period to kind of fill things in?
Yeah, I think you've addressed it. Our numbers reflect our needs, and our needs reflect our assessment on what we saw in the spring. And so when we see, we act. And I think we act effectively, efficiently, and usually successfully. And so we added in relation to deficiencies that we saw, depth needs that we assessed, or quite frankly, maybe ability that had to be enhanced. So any of those needs were in relation to one of those 3 things that had to happen, and had to happen immediately for this program and this current team to have the success and the best chances for success that we're all hopeful for.
I want to ask you about those 3 linebackers. Tyreek Austin Cave, a West Virginia transfer by way of Miami. Randolph Kapai, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, a transfer from Nebraska. And Nico Bowler, a transfer from Diablo Valley Community College. What do those guys bring to the table in that room in particular?
Yeah, not in any particular order. Numbers most probably importantly. We needed depth. We needed numbers. That's not only to play defense, but it's to play special teams. Those body types that can run, hit, and tackle. Yeah, it's hard to play defense or cover kicks without those body types. And so we looked hard for players that could do that. I feel really good about each of those 3. And that's as good as you can feel on tape until they arrive. And now they're finishing their 2nd week of workouts. Those are non-contact workouts that are strength and conditioning oriented only. But you can still assess, did what I see on film in terms of movement, is that real? And were we accurate? And I would say yes on all 3. In terms of personality, hard with the amount of time that you have after spring to really get to know. And so we ask really pointed questions. We're very diligent and deep in terms of our inquiry. That doesn't mean you certainly know that there's a great fit or connection between coach-player, player and culture, and how they will assimilate. And so there's always some trepidation as they arrive. Man, we really like who these kids are in addition to what we've seen and how they're training. And that just makes everyone feel good because the players are assessing that as well. Wait, do I fit here? Is what I was told true? Is the need what I was told? And can I really play and play here in the role that was presented? And those answers for everyone, there's no reason not to present that ever truthfully, which we always do. And when the fit is accurate and right, everyone's happier, and that's what's happening.
And I'll kind of divert a little bit too. We had talked about, scheduling spring ball and stuff like that. I know you don't like spring break kind of interrupting or, dividing spring practice in some ways, but you also said that you liked kind of the fact that there was an overlap between spring practice and the portal opening up because it kind of had a hold on some of the guys to at least, stay within the program and finish things out. Doing it one more in this kind of era, I mean, do you still like the late spring ball model? Or are you still going to go with it?
I don't know yet. I really like the design for year one or season one and how we approached it. I liked 8 weeks of uninterrupted training, which again helped get us to the late start. Spring break was at the end of that 8 weeks, which then gave us one more week after spring break before we started spring practice to reacclimate them after the break to what spring practice was going to look like. Really challenging when the portal opened to be practicing at the same time. There was a lot that we had to manage. We had suspected that might provide a stronger hold on our existing players. Ultimately, that was a non-issue, and it really wasn't something that I think any of us really acknowledged. Even though it was an intentional design, it was really an overreaction, I think. Hard to know because I didn't know my team well at that point. What we gained from that, I think, was the best preparation we could be in, the best preparation we could have received physically and mentally prior to spring practice. So we maximized our spring practice by waiting as long to do it. And then I also learned that I think it really helped drive and keep the culture, but also the daily rhythm consistent through academics, through study hall, through practice longer. And so from the time we trained in the off-season part before spring practice, it just kept that consistency and rhythm to where we were performing at a high level in all areas, again, including academics, which we talked about, which I think really added a sense of clarity for our team as to what this is going to be like for the fall, because basically we did it for a longer period of time. Now, going to next year and trying to predict, really hard to say. I will have learned so much more about our team. I will have learned so much more about UNM now that I'm back. And quite frankly, could spring practice move up? It depends on maybe the physical readiness that I've assessed our team. It might be done before spring practice, right? And then there might be a more focused emphasis on our personnel and recruiting based on what changes have happened in the portal from now till then, which who knows what will happen. So I reserve the right to be flexible. I love to be nimble and be able to adjust rapidly to change and then have a great plan. So I could see the same model happening based on what I've seen by the time we get there. Could I also see it moving up? I could see it moving up, but that's based on the feedback I will have had between now when we're talking and then. So I probably have 3 models, maybe a 4th that I'm contemplating. So they're ready and outlined, and then which one our team fits, it becomes plug and play.
On the note, going back to some of the additions and stuff like that, throughout spring, it's not, with the exception of maybe quarterback and running back, it's not like you committed to, these are the guys at linebacker, these are the guys on the defensive line, all that. But maybe the secondary kind of was maybe the most, non-committal is too strong of a word, but it felt like there's more things in the air in terms of just how that was playing out with both the safeties and the corners to another degree. I know Noah Avindra had stepped up pretty well in that room and all that. But you did add 4 DBs, Javonte Royal, corner from Pitt, Cam Watts, corner from Texas Tech, Ishmael Berdine, DB from TCU by way of Mizzou, and Dom Tatum, a safety from Wazoo who has some Mountain West experience, played 4 seasons, I believe, at Utah State. It's kind of similar to the linebacker question, but how do those guys kind of address, I don't want to say the needs, but help you fill out kind of the secondary as well?
I wouldn't step away from the word need. There's 4 basically corners / I would say corner specifically with 1 safety and Tatum. Need was assessed in the secondary. And so we realized after spring we're not deep enough. We're not experienced enough. We're not healthy enough. And when you consider what the league might look like with the new coaches that are coming, the volume of balls that might be in the air, and us having enough competition to compete effectively, not only within a position room, right, to drive the behavior and performance that we want, but also to possibly have nickel, to possibly have dime, but also to possibly just drive the culture of the starting 5 to perform at the level necessary. That had to be addressed. And so numbers were part of that. Now, who the numbers were, that was also essential. So we've had history with a number of those players, 3 of the 4 existing relationships with, which, man, relationships mitigate risk. When you know how they play, when you know who they are, and when trust is established because of existing relationships, man, that really helps. And so in this case, yeah, it worked out really well for us and them, which now is us. Them and us is now us. And so they're in their second week of acclimation. The altitude certainly is a wake-up call for them. Our work capacity as a team and the diligence and difficulty of the program is also a wake-up call, which they were told. But I think they're fulfilled, and I think they see an opportunity, which is what they were also presented with.
What were some of those previously existing relationships? Were they from former recruitments, or how did that play out in particular?
Former recruitment at UVA. So when we were at the University of Virginia, and again, these are older players now, right? That means were recruited at the University of Virginia and then went to maybe one Power 5 school, not UVA, but they remembered their relationships with us in recruiting, and they remembered the approach, and they liked that. We also remembered them with the thought that if they ever choose to leave or if they're ever not playing as much as we think they are, we'll be ready if. And so we were ready with Javante Royal from Pitt. We recruited him out of UVA. We would be ready with or for Ishmael if he happened to ever choose after his second Power 5 program. Ready if Dom Tatum from an existing player that I had coached at Brigham Young University, who's their corners coach, Gennaro Guilford. This is a relative of his. So someone that I coached, his relative, that's less than one step removed, and that matters to me in terms of trust. So those are the kind of relationships when you inherit a program that mitigate risk, that accelerate opportunity for everyone, and most likely attract. And so I don't think it's a unique story, but I think, man, it's an effective story.
You guys added 2 offensive linemen, younger offensive linemen, compared to some of the offensive linemen you added in the fall. In the over the winter and early spring, who were for the most part a lot of older guys. Those new additions: Tevin Shaw, Lejuan Owens, Shaw from Houston, Owens from Tulane. I mean, it was a little not surprising, but interesting in the sense that you guys had to replace a ton of guys in the offensive line room. That's kind of a really hard position to do that in. But what did those guys kind of stand out to you guys in terms of, hey, we just needed a little bit more depth here? We like these guys in terms of that, or
both? As you already mentioned, at the offensive front, wow, we had basically the entire 2 deep to replace. That's just, sometimes you have different challenges when you take over a program in different positions. So that we addressed that and addressed it well from what I saw in the spring. When you address immediate needs, usually that means immediate availability, and that usually means upperclassmen. And so knowing that the 2 deep, right, you'd love as much experience as possible and as much competition as possible, usually that will occur with upperclassmanship, if that's a word. What became clear to us is the succession planning is also an issue with offensive front play. And it'd be nice to have an heir apparent or an understudy on the way to becoming. And we were thin in terms of that. We were top heavy, and we still are defensive line-wise. And so sometimes when you inherit a program and through the portal, rarely, but sometimes you make decisions on a 1-year player. Man, don't want to do that very much, but sometimes it's necessary. 2 years, man, that's still tough. I would love 3 years or more, but urgency sometimes requires 2, sometimes 1. And so we did that at the offensive front. Other positions, we felt good enough that our needs were met offensively by the end of this selection and assessment period, where it then became best available players that we think could add value. And the 2 that you just mentioned became best available players that could add value, much like the draft board. And now we have youth, we have capability, and we have some spacing that should allow for some consistency.
Kind of moving on and looking a little bit towards the season a little more, you did mention the first 4 games and kind of looking at that more, and you also mentioned that obviously the kind of turnover in terms of head coaches in the Mountain West. I think you're one of 6 new head coaches in the Mountain West. I don't know the last time that's actually happened, and I have not looked it up yet. But you guys open up with a week 0 kickoff against Montana State. There is kind of tiers to FCS scheduling and the like. There's some that, every game is a challenge, but some maybe don't present that big of a challenge. Montana State is not that. Montana State is one of the best programs in FCS. Very, very good. I think they almost had North Dakota State in the playoffs last year. It was very good team. How are you kind of approaching that game in particular?
Just how you said, they're a very good team. Most of the opponents in my preparation are nameless and faceless. I just look at capacity. What label is attached to them in terms of tier is really irrelevant to me. Montana State reminds me a lot of what James Madison was when I was out in Virginia as an FCS program, a playoff team, a capable team, a team that was the top or in the top maybe 4 per year consistently. And wow, there's very little difference between the top FCS programs and most Group of 5 programs. Depth is usually the main issue, not capacity. And so Montana State, they know how to win. They're very successful. They're coached really well. They're a playoff team annually, and usually disappointed if they're not playing for the FCS championship. And so it's a program that knows how to win, and I think they're very capable. So challenging, but great opener in terms of a test. And yeah, I like challenges and I like tests.
You follow that up with a trip to Arizona and then a bye and then a trip to Auburn as well. Arizona, first year under Brent Brennan, long-time San Diego State, well, maybe not long time, but San Diego State head coach, and then Hugh Freeze, second year at Auburn. And that's kind of being your true P5, autonomous 4, whatever you'd like to call it, draw this year. What can you tell us about those teams?
Yeah, capable. Arizona, I think, is very talented. So I haven't run across Coach Brennan much from his time at San Jose to now going to Arizona. Certainly he's qualified for the job, did a really nice job at San Jose State, has a great reputation, and now really good players and resources. And so I think they selected well in choosing him. Again, I'm not so caught up in what league or what place or what name. It's just a talented football team that's really well coached with recent success, but also a change in leadership. And so we'll look at their staff, we'll look at their players, we'll look at their culture, we'll look at their execution. And we will have played one game. They will have not played one, so there'll be some uncertainty on our part knowing what they're going to do schematically. They'll have a little bit more knowledge on us because they will have seen us play. But we will have played one and they haven't played one. And so that usually, I like the idea to think of that. I usually know more about my team than they'll know about their team. This isn't specific to Arizona. This is anyone that hasn't played yet. And it's another road game. And so we would have the equivalent this year, most of the time at the Group of 5 level in terms of scheduling. You normally think about an FCS opponent, right? You normally think about a rival game, which in our case, right, NMSU. You normally think about another team that's Group of 5 that might be 50-50. I mean, it's a great matchup and could go either way. And then you usually think about one game that would typically in the industry be called a bye game, where it would be an upset if you win. Most likely the team you're going to go play is offering you money to go play there. In this case, in this year, we have 2 games that would qualify for that. And so following up Arizona, byes are interesting. And I've never had a season where we've had 2 byes in a season. This year we have 3, which is a really unique rhythm. Also, never had a season where there's only been 5 home games and 7 on the road. Normally, it's at least been 6 and 6. So none of those things are anything other. You acknowledge them, plan for them, and move forward. So with 3 bye games and being a first-year head coach at this program, there's a great chance to assess, reflect, and adjust 3 different times based on each data point we're getting with about a 4-game sample size, right? The first one comes after 2, and then you play a little bit and get to reassess, then you play. So I think there are some advantages, even though it's less than ideal, but unique. But in this circumstance, at UNM this season, under the transition, I don't think you'd have to stretch far to say it could work to our advantage. And so it just happens on the front end where one of those buys happens pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. After Auburn, Fresno State at home, and then go down to Cruces. You got NMSU. I don't think I've asked you anything about your kind of recollections from when you were here previously with the New Mexico State rivalry. Obviously, you've been a part of 2 fantastic rivalries, BYU and Utah, and then Virginia Tech. What do you kind of remember about being a part of the New Mexico State rivalry, and how do you kind of value the rivalry in some ways?
It's been a long time. What I know, regardless, and I'm not going to diminish New Mexico State, nor am I going to diminish BYU, Utah, or UVA, Virginia Tech. Each school has a really unique game that has disproportionate value, mostly to the residents of that state. It'll still count as a win or a loss. Sometimes, though, to an existing community or state, they care most if that game is won more than anything else that happens that season, more than postseason, more than a conference championship. It has to be the state championship, or it has to be whatever the name of that game is. Once you understand that well and put it in context, right, then you have a great chance to understand. But does that mean now you're going to try harder? Does that mean now you're going to prepare differently? It just means that there are other things that come with that game in terms of emotion, in terms of other people's interest in that game, in terms of comments that you might receive all week long or after, right? So the game has more value. That has to be acknowledged to so many people. And so literally the way the game is played, the way it's prepared for, has to reflect what's at stake. And when it does, it's great to have wins in those games. And when it doesn't, those are long years waiting until you have another chance to win that game. And so, but that's the same really for the rest of the season as well. However, locally, right, which is where we all live, it has disproportionate value, and I think it has to be prepared for and acknowledged as such.
From there, you get into the meat of the conference schedule. Air Force at home, at Utah State, at Colorado State, Wyoming at home, at San Diego State, and then a home finale in the 7+1 Mountain West Pac-12 or Pac-2 kind of alliance against Washington State. Is there any thoughts on how that plays out on a week-to-week basis for you guys?
Yeah, I think the simple thing, just to acknowledge bluntly, is I think we'll be an underdog in every game. And I think there's been plenty of, and I'm not a social media or print media or a follower of most of that. My guess would be if you looked right now, is New Mexico favored in any of those games? My guess would be probably not. So challenging schedule, but a great schedule, week after week after week after week. So I like what it presents. I like the opportunities that are ahead. I like the parity that exists in the Mountain West Conference, and I like our chances. And so, yeah, one at a time against each opponent for what they are, not anything else, just for what they are, and we'll do our very best. But it's a challenging but great schedule.
And I know you don't pay attention to this aspect in particular, but I mean, from what I've seen, there is legitimate, palpable optimism from the fan base. There is a sense of renewal there. And on the outside, you know, Vegas, they set the odds in mid-May or so, and they have you guys bottom of the conference, over under 1.5 wins.
Yeah.
I mean, and so there's almost there's a disconnect between the kind of hopeful reality and the projected reality in that ways. I mean, how do you? It's not for you to sort through. You're just coaching the team and figuring that out, and the results will be what they are. But I mean, how do you view that kind of number, 1.5 at that point?
It's just entertainment. For anyone that pays any attention. At the University of Virginia, we went from 2-10 to the Orange Bowl in 4 years. That's pretty fast. Postseason, year 2, shutting out an opponent in a bowl game, year 3, and then winning our division by year 4. Most would say, man, that's going to take 4 years. Or some would say, holy smokes, he did it in 4 years. Time frames are what they are now. Most would like that sooner rather than later, starting year 1. So Vegas chose what they think year 1 will look like. I think the optimism that's palpable and the belief that's becoming and the sense of excitement is for not only what this year will be, but what this is going to be, and sooner rather than later. And the track record basically shows that how could it not be? If you're looking at coach and staff and history, if you're looking at New Mexico history, you could say, well, I'm going to argue the other way. It's going to play out in front of all of us. And I like our chances. I really do. And I like our team.
I want to ask you, just kind of wrapping up a little bit, about kind of 2 big picture items currently right now. I believe it was 3, maybe 3.5 weeks ago. The NCAA and its power conferences, they came to a settlement in the House versus NCAA case, agreed to $2.8 billion in damages to former college athletes and 22% of the average Power 5 schools' revenues. This settlement kind of also opens the doors for, no more scholarship caps and the like, and it seems potentially troubling for some G5 schools and some lower tier D1s and the like. I mean, as a head coach, how do you kind of look at this, and how do you even start to prepare for that potential reality if it does go through?
Yeah, I'm a big picture thinker, and I love analyzing the landscape and being ready for pivot and adjustment, and then leveraging that and differentiating and capitalizing. And so, your assessment, which is pretty common right now, to say there'll be no scholarship limits and et cetera, I actually think it's going to go the other way.
Really?
So I think here's going to be revenue sharing, And could there be 85 players on scholarship with no other players on a roster? It could go that way also. The interesting thing right now, and I don't know which way it will go, but could it go either? Surely. Then you'd have to say, what does a Big Ten school and SEC school have in common with a Mountain West school? How much difference is there? I would argue there's a significant difference. And so at some point, right, the revenue and the finances will cause another seismic shift in, I would say, who plays with whom and what levels and what leagues look like. How long will a team, let's just say Oregon, how long will their softball team continue to travel across the country to play? How long will any school that travels from one coast to the other primarily to play football, how many times will their other sports do that? And what will that financial component look like? It could be sooner rather than later where I would just call them the non-salary cap leagues choose to play football across the country, but their other sports choose to be back part of maybe what the Pac-12 looked like. I'm using that just an example, or the Big 12 or whatever, right? Their other sports maybe come to their senses. Athletic departments realize sustainability of cost. How does this work for entire athletic departments to keep traveling back and forth? And why would we do that? We already know the why, which is finance, but the why specifically was for football. And so, yeah, now that revenue is being shared, what does that look like for the collectives at the A4 level? We'll see. What does that then look like for financing and collectives for the group of five? That's a completely different narrative. And so now to say the group of five schools should operate or be governed by or directed by what the A4 does, yeah, I'm opposed to that because it's not the same conversation, nor is it the same in terms of specificity. So the friction point with the ruling by the House, right, and what that's going to do, all that's going to do is crystallize now some of the other issues that already exist. And whatever A4 chooses, if then that now is opposed, if that is now imposed down through G5, like that now is just what is relevant and acceptable for all, we already know that's not effective, starting immediately with revenue share. And you could add other things to that. So I see an expedited version of, a structural change in college football. 3 years seems a long time. I think it will be 3 years or less. What direction it'll go, I don't know. Will it end up being untapped scholarships? Would it end up being, who knows, women's sports, right? Title IX, Olympic sports. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty and angst, quite frankly, and football is caring for football right now. But it's going to broaden, that perspective is going to broaden almost immediately once it goes to revenue share. And now what does that look like for the athletic department? And do these trans-United States, does it make sense? And I think we already all know that, other than football. Now, whether that decision is made, we'll see. And how does that affect Group of Five? And does Group of Five become its own entity with its own playoff? I know many are resistant to give up the playoff spot, like we've fought so hard to get that. You could also argue we're giving up a lot else for that playoff spot if we just say we're going to play by the same rules that the A4 is, which is, quite frankly, quite different. So lots to sort through. Relevant conversation, lots of uncertainty. I think the time frame is going to be probably expedited. That's what it feels like to me. And so, we'll be as prepared as possible.
There's a fresh item today, and I don't know how much you've been able to read into it, that could also probably expedite that timeline, and it kind of falls perfectly into the who asked for this kind of deal. The Big 12 is reported to, they're considering, a private equity investment from Luxembourg-based CVC Capital Partners. That'd be a 15 to 20% stake for our good friends in Luxembourg, and larger payouts, obviously, for the 60-member schools of the Big 12. It seemed as if this is the direction we were kind of going down for a little bit. I know Florida State kind of flirted with the idea a little bit last year, but hadn't done anything concrete, and this isn't concrete right now. But I mean, any thoughts on this kind of arrangement in college athletics?
Yeah, I wasn't aware. It doesn't surprise me, and I think the word that you use, flirting, is teased, flirting, whatever, like exploring. That's happening. It's driven by money, right? It's driven by profit, and college football is becoming professional sport, which it's not a hard argument to make. Young people are benefiting now, and I'm not opposed to that. Man, I love to work hard to make team culture really effective in this world of finance. I love to make individual and human development part of, right, college athletics. I love to see the academic accomplishments in spite of the rest of the stuff that's going on, and I think it can happen. It's harder, but man, that's the direction we're going to go. When it comes now to private equity, yeah, then there's a unique balance of power of who's in charge, who governs, who do you answer to, and what does college athletics really look like once that's part of it. And college athletics, by definition, would be significantly different. I'm not saying better or worse, but wow, would you have to be really skilled in your leadership, in your processes, in your judgment to maintain student-athlete, if that's the intent. Now, if that's not the intent, wow, that's a whole different construct, and each institution gets to choose that, right? Which I know what I choose, and I choose for UNM, at least the football part, but each leader gets to choose that. And so I think what we're clear about with the possibility of this is increased revenue. And if a television deal isn't as strong as the SECs, if a television deal isn't as strong as the Big Tens, how do you then acquire a competitive basis in terms of finance and where it's source? And so I think the Big 12 leaders have identified a source, maybe a brand, maybe a way of doing business that they see as a competitive advantage, and possibly more than flirting, maybe they'll date, right? and who knows? Maybe they'll be, I don't know, maybe they'll be married. I mean, who knows what direction it'll go? I wouldn't be surprised. And really a lot of options are on the table.
On a non-big picture thing, just kind of wanted to close with this. I mean, obviously you had, spent a lot of time in Albuquerque before coming back. I mean, some fond memories from when you were here prior, but, you've been here 6 months. I mean, what's it kind of like been getting reacquainted with not just Albuquerque, but kind of New Mexico as a whole in some ways? And I know you've been terribly busy throughout those 6 months, but in between, I should say.
Yeah, there hasn't been much time in between, but wow, the welcome. Sincere, authentic, genuine, grateful, and optimistic. I feel compelled and just driven to have good football in Albuquerque and at UNM, and for there to be another positive thing for this state, for this community, for this school to have on weekends, another thing they can be proud of, another thing they can get behind, another thing that could possibly teach and add lessons to families and kids and have it play out in a successful college athletics program in terms of football. And so I feel a huge responsibility with the welcome I've received. No one can put higher expectations on our program than me. And I feel like I'm acting on behalf of, right, the entire state, but especially Albuquerque and UNM. And so that weighs on me, but also provides a sense of purpose and opportunity. And I like impact and I like making a difference. And so I think I'm in a really good spot at a really cool place to do that. And I would express gratitude for what has happened already.
Bronco, I think that's all I have today.
Great.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we've covered it.
All right, well, that was Writer's Block, Episode 6. Thanks again to Bronco Mendenhall for joining us today in studio. If you want to listen to this or other podcasts in the Journal Podcast Network, you can find them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, and please subscribe to the Journal to get more content like this. Bronco, thank you again.
My pleasure.